All right, welcome Soundies to our Sound for Video session. It is the 17th of January 2021. Glad to have all of you here, and we have a lot to cover today, so we're going to go ahead and dive into our, whoa, not to our agenda here yet. We have a little problem with our agenda. 1 second here. There we go. Okay. All right, first up, tonight, January 17th at 8:30 p.m. U.S. Mountain Time. So that's UTC -7. I hope I got that right, Rob. Jim and Rob have their regular weekly live stream where they overanalyze movies. And in this particular case, they're going to be taking a look at a movie called Making Waves. And they have a special guest that would appear. So let's take a look at there's the thumbnail for tonight's show. I am very much looking forward to talking with Jim and Rob about the movie Making Waves, the art of cinematic sound. So, looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And if you guys can join, we'd love to have you there. There will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie, it's a documentary. So, I mean, spoilers are not the same as spoilers in narrative film. But in any case, we'll have a good time there, I think, tonight. Next up, Dean has a spare set of bioluminescent replacement knobs for the Zoom F6. Let me just show those to you here. So the Zoom F6 has these really tiny knobs on them, and they're, it can be hard to tell. Whoops, it's trying to focus on my face. Try to tell them apart can be tough. And what these are, they're replacements. So you can use a set of pliers with maybe a little cloth between the pliers and the knob, pull the old knobs off or the original knobs off, and pop these on. These also have that you can see on the little red one there. They also have these little metal studs that make it easier for one finger adjustment. So it's kind of a nice little upgrade for your Zoom F6. So we're going to give those away right now. And let's go ahead and if you are interested, if you have a Zoom F6 or you're planning to buy one soon, let's go ahead. You're welcome to be in the little drawing here. And why don't you let's just go ahead and choose a random number. We're going to go to random.org and choose a random number. And then Emma will, in the chat, just tell us when to start putting your numbers in. Okay, go ahead and start putting your numbers in. Choose a number between 1 and 50. And whoever gets closest to the number will be the winner. And Dean is very kindly offered to ship those over to you. So thanks, Dean, for doing that. Really appreciate that. And also thanks to Scott over at Bioluminescent for making these products. All right. Do we have some things trickling in yet? Not yet. We'll give you a few more seconds here. For those that haven't caught it, we did have a video review of the PodTrack P8 from Zoom that went up on the main channel this morning at 10 o'clock. And I apologize if I sounded a little preachy and annoyed in that video. I was a little annoyed. The truth is, I was a little bit annoyed. And it had to do with sample rates. I'm not concerned about the audio quality with the 44.1 kilohertz sample rate. I just find it really annoying and difficult to work with in terms of managing audio when you're working with video where the standard is 48 kilohertz. So anyway, I'll get off of that soapbox. We're good?
Yep, we're ended.
We're ended, okay. The random number was 44. So Emma's taking a look here to see who's closest to 44.
49.
49. Do we have a winner? We do. JNV is our winner. So JNV, if you would just email me at curtis@learnlightandsound.com, and I will get you in touch with Dean, and the two of you can work out the shipping details, and you'll have a set of those for your Zoom F6. So very good. All right, let's go back over to our agenda here and see what else we've got next. I think the next thing up on the list is the Loudness Normalization demo. Before I jump into that, let me say something. I have had people express some frustration that I use certain tools versus other tools, and I totally understand that. If you're trying to learn a new tool, it's it can be completely daunting. And learning audio from the start, there's a lot to learn. So I understand that. And what I want to kind of focus on is understanding the concepts and the principles. And once you understand those, you can do most of this work in any application. So for example, here today, I back up, background info, I have decided, for now at least, to cancel my subscription for Adobe Audition. Now, that doesn't mean I'm never going to use Adobe Audition again. It just means I need to give myself some motivation to learn a new app. And so that's what I've done. Today's demo is going to be done in Izotope RX. What we do here in Izotope RX can be done in other applications. It's not as if Izotope RX has any sort of monopoly on the ability to do most of the things that we're going to do today, if not all the things that we're going to do today. So don't think of it so much in terms of understanding an individual app. I wish I could teach every single app that's out there. There are just so many of them, I can't. So we're going to do this in Izotope. A lot of other apps have, a lot of other digital audio workstations have this same functionality. So that's kind of the background, and that'll become clear when we get to our question and answer. Jim asked a specific question about that. So, all right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. So this is just a little audio clip from Emma. She's going to switch over to that here, and let me just pull up over here our loudness control. So a couple of weeks ago on my main channel, I did a little piece about loudness versus volume. And the idea with that was, of course, to kind of make the distinction between those two, where volume is what you change with the control on your playback system versus loudness, which is baked into the digital audio file. What we're going to do here is demonstrate how I usually go about doing the loudness normalization. And there are a variety of different ways to do it, but the principles, again, are pretty much the same. So what we're measuring here is, first of all, loudness units full scale. So our integrated loudness, and this is, well, actually, let me take a step back. When you're doing loudness normalization, it is typically the very last step you do. You have already done your mix. You have already done your edit. Everything is ready to go. Everything's sounding good together. But now you just need to get the loudness of the overall audio to a specific target. Now, we're going to go to web with this particular one, so we're going to aim for -16, -17. I typically like to go -17, to be honest. I think a lot of others recommend -16, but I like, for spoken word content, I like -17, retains just a tiny bit more dynamic range, a little bit less of that compressed sound to it. So that's what I typically aim for. Now, I know on a lot of the services, Spotify, YouTube, some of the other streaming services, they actually target -14 LUFS. That's because, certainly in the case of Spotify, they're specifically, their main business from the start has been music. Now they're starting to get into podcasts as well, but music is their main thing. And for music, I think they actually did a service to the world by setting that target to -14, because that way it kind of helps level the playing field instead of having this kind of silly loudness war that's been going on in the pop music world for 20 some years, well, more than 20, a few decades. This actually gets us out of that and actually normalizes it levels the playing field. Let's say it that way. But for dialogue, typically I'm going to aim for -16, -17. So let me just show you what we've got here. Now, what this integrated loudness refers to is it refers to the overall measure of the entire mix. This is our mix here. We're just going to call it a mix. It's not technically a mix. It's just but this would be our mix down that we're going to loudness normalize at this point. Let me just kind of play a couple minutes or a couple seconds of it here for you so you can see where we're starting.
Well, I started in GarageBand Mobile, so for iOS. That is not... Well, maybe it is where I would start now. It's very, very similar to GarageBand for desktop, which is in turn very, very similar to Logic.
Okay. So obviously I didn't actually do any editing here. There's some mouth clicks and stuff like that we could clean up and blah, blah, blah. But let's just assume this is our final mix. Everything is sounding good. Now, the idea of a mix is to get everything sounding together. Everything should sound in the same realm. People shouldn't have to crank their volume up and down. They should be able to understand the dialogue. They should be able to hear and enjoy the music so that it can touch them emotionally. All of those things should already be in place with your mix. You bounce it out to something like this, and then we measure the integrated loudness. That's the overall measure of loudness of the entire piece. So right now we're sitting at minus 27. So we essentially want to get, we want to go louder than that. Now, a couple things, when you're talking mono versus stereo, the targets change a little bit because the perceptual, when you get things perceptually the same for stereo versus mono, they're a little different in their measurements of loudness units full scale. What I mean by that, if we want to target minus 17 LUFS for web, that would be for stereo. That means the mono file needs to be minus 20. So that's what we're going to aim for here. And then once we put it back in our video editing app, that's where we would change it to dual mono, which would essentially make it stereo. Okay? Dual mono is just the exact same thing on the left channel and the right channel. And that's one way to do it. Now, normally, if you did have music in your mix and not just dialogue, you would probably be doing this process here in stereo. So you would be targeting, in that case, minus 17. All right, so we want to get to minus 20, but in addition to minus 20, we have to get from minus 27 to minus 20, but we also need to leave a little bit of headroom for true peak. Because what happens is once you export your video, the lossy format that you export to will eat up some of that headroom. So what we normally aim for here is a true peak of minus 1.5. So I have to get essentially 10, well, let's see, no, I need to get to 20. So I need 7.2 dB louder audio, or which is also equivalent to 7.2 loudness units full scale louder audio. So I need to be able to boost this all by 7 dB. And I also need to have an additional 1.5 true peak headroom. So that's what we need to aim for. Now, there are a few ways we can go about doing that. And what I want to do here is show a couple of different ways. And in fact, this will come up in one of our questions later today as well. So to do that, you can see right now, if I just went ahead and bumped this up, let's say I want to go to minus 20, watch what happens. We're going to go ahead and leave a true peak headroom of 1.5, but it's going to do something here to us. It's actually going to heavily limit some of these right here just because we didn't have enough headroom to start with. So you can see those are kind of chopped off. In this case, it probably wouldn't be a deal breaker, but these are chopped off a little bit more severely down here. So that's not ideal. We don't want to do that. And the phantom mouse is doing its thing here. Okay, so I'm going to undo that. That's not how we'd want to go about it normally. And actually it added, I didn't set that correctly, minus 20, but we'll undo that and just say, okay, there we go. Let's go back to the start. Now, there are a few things we can do. I would say the first thing I would try is leveling. So a lot of times what happens is you've got the, Emma got a little bit louder right here in this part of her speech. And so one thing we could do is use a leveler. And Izotope RX has one. I believe that Adobe Audition has one now as well. So the idea here is it's measuring our total RMS loudness right now at minus 25. We really just want to leave it at that. We don't want to change the RMS, but what we want it to do is just kind of level things out. So we'll leave that right around 25. I don't want to do any de-essing or anything like that right now. I'm going to assume that that's all been done in the cleanup beforehand. We will do a little bit of breath control because we're going to be bumping things up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and choose Set Clip Gain. And I want you to see what this actually does to the audio. Look, it kind of have evened it out. And in fact, if we look back over here, it didn't change the integrated loudness, but it did change the total RMS. Isn't that interesting? That's where LUFS is a better measure of how things are actually changing. Interesting thing there. All right, so now did we see a change here? Not a change in the true peak either. Okay, so what I want to do is show you what it actually did. This is what's called clip gain. You can see essentially what it did is it went through and it said, okay, let's make this quieter. Let's bump this up, make this a little louder, this a little louder. Ooh, that needs to be quieter. There's a breath. Make this louder, make this a little quieter, just so it evened it all out. And that's what it did through the entire clip here. And you can see, okay, this one was a little quieter, so they bumped that up, dropped it in between phrases, and then dropped it back down again. So the idea here, the thing that's kind of interesting about leveling is that you can potentially avoid some of the issues of raising the noise floor, potentially. So it does a kind of a much more precision job of boosting the things that need to be boosted and kind of leveling things out. So that's one way you could go about it. Now that we're at this point here, I still need that 7.2 dB of headroom plus 1.5 dB on top of that. So 7, 8, let's say 9 dB of headroom. So I need to get a 9 dB of headroom. Now I could go about doing that, of course, a few different ways. One thing I would look at is to see, do we have a lot of asymmetry in our waveform? Now this is a tool that you can add into Adobe Audition or other DAWs, but don't usually come stock with them. And we do have a phase plugin here that does this with this adaptive phase rotation. So what this does is essentially it will correct for any of those kind of asymmetric waveforms and give us a little bit more headroom than we have right now with 6.7. So let's just run that and see what we get here. Well, that did something weird. It is now saying that we have our integrated loudness. I'm going to undo. We got something funny going on there. Okay, so I see this didn't update. When we did the leveling, it actually already made it louder, and it gave us some headroom there. So what I'm going to do here is let's render that again. That's really weird. I wonder why it was saying the true peak was 2.0. Yeah, I don't know what it's measuring as a true peak of 2.0 now. That doesn't make sense. Maybe we found a bug in RX. Really interesting. Okay, so I'm going to undo that. Let's just skip. Let's not do this. I'm going to have to report that to Izotope. I don't know what that is or where that sample was that was creating that problem. But let's do this. Let's just say, okay, what I need here now is I've got 4.5. I need another 1.5 dB of true peak headroom on top of that. So I need to get to 20. So 4.5 plus 1.5 is what, 25, 26. So it's 6. I need an additional 6 dB of headroom. So I'm going to pull out my compressor here. And this compressor for Jim, for the question that you asked her, and we're going to come to in our Q&A session here, this is going to work pretty much just like the compressor in Adobe Audition. There's not, I mean, the controls look a little different, but the attack, ratio, release, makeup, and threshold are all basically the same. So what I need to do is I just need to manage some of these transients here so that we have that 6 dB of true peak headroom so that we can then boost the overall audio up. So if I use just the top of this window as kind of a guide, we just really have a few transients that we need to manage here. So I'm going to set my threshold to 10. That's where I have the top of the window right now. It's at 10 dB. So it's just going to really manage those transients. I'm going to go with just a pretty mild. We don't need a super strong ratio. 3:1 will do. I'm going to go with a fast attack because I'm trying to manage the transients. I need to pull those down quickly. 500 millisecond release. Let's go ahead and do a preview and hear how that sounds as we play through it. Always important when you apply an effect, listen to it to see how it changes things.
Well, I started in GarageBand Mobile, so for iOS. That is not, well, maybe it is where I would start now. It's very, very similar to GarageBand for desktop, which is in turn very, very similar to Logic.
Okay, so we're getting some compression there. It's handling those transients, and it's sounding pretty transparent to me. It's not like it's really crushing her voice and making it super compressed. So we're going to go ahead and render that. So you can see it pulled those peaks down already. And let's see where we ended up here. I think the loudness control is like taking a vacation today. Let's go ahead and pull that back up. Okay, so we have the 6 that we need, so that means we can go ahead and bump this up. So let's go ahead and set this to -20. Again, we needed -6, and we're good now. We'll go ahead and render that out. It's going to take a couple seconds there. All right, we're now at -20, and we have a true peak ceiling of -3. And this is what it sounds like now. Let's put our headphones back on.
Well, I started in GarageBand Mobile, so for iOS. That is not, well, maybe it is where I would start now. It's very, very similar to GarageBand for desktop, which is in turn very, very similar to Logic. So if you're wanting to get started on something that is very easy to use.
Okay, So that is how I would loudness normalize. Now I'd bump this or bounce this back out and bring that into my final video, export, and we're good to go from there. Again, we didn't do all the careful mixing that we typically would have done. I just needed an audio clip that I could use as a demonstration, but that's how we would get it. Now, once we get this over into our video editing app, we would also make it dual mono. So that will make the -20, then -17 stereo. Remember, dual mono is just the same thing out of both speakers in our case. And there's always that 3 dB difference between mono and stereo. So hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully that gives you some information on how I typically go about that. Now you can do this in any application that processes audio. The workflow is going to be a little different. But if you need a free way to do it and you need a plugin, there is a plugin called the Julian Loudness Meter. The part of the reason I like doing it in Izotope, just to kind of give you some background, and again, Jim, we're going to come to your question, and I understand where you're coming from. You can't afford the $900 Canadian. Totally makes sense. But the Julian loudness meter will measure the integrated loudness, but what you have to do is let the meter go through the entire mix to measure the integrated loudness. So that's a trade-off. I mean, if you're working on a short film that's 10 minutes, every time you want to measure that loudness, you have to wait 10 minutes and actually run through the entire audio. Some of them, I don't know if some of them can do it in, I don't know, it just really depends on the app. So you have to have this what we call offline capability is really helpful because it just speeds up the workflow. So, but if you're trying to do it with a tighter budget, Julian loudness meter is a good way to go. All right, let's head on back to our agenda. I think it's time to hop in. Let's see. Any advice to avoid raising the noise floor when adding compression? Yes. So the leveler is one way to go about that. If you use a leveler as opposed to a compressor when possible. I think for dialogue audio, a leveler can be really, really useful. And we just demonstrated how to do that here. So you might want to, if you missed that part, you can go back and take a look at it. But you can always use noise reduction. And in fact, the noise reduction in Adobe Audition is great. It's really good here in, here, for example, we have both the voice denoiser, if we want to switch back over to our screen here. And we also have the, where is it? Dialogue isolate is excellent, absolutely excellent. So this can be a really useful one as well. So if after you apply that compression and you're feeling like the noise floor is sitting a little too high, definitely come in and take a look at these. Oh, whoops, we're cutting that off. There, yeah, dialogue isolate and or voice denoise, or in pretty much any application, any digital audio workstation application, there is a denoising plugin of some sort, and that's the main thing that I would look to. Now, what I would also recommend is that when you do it, apply it very lightly, and if it ends up making the noise floor very prominent, do multiple passes that are very light, as opposed to one single pass. So those are some thoughts to keep in mind as far as noise floor when it comes to denoising after you've done some compression and normalizing. All right, let's jump into our question and answer, and we'll go through that. So this is Jim's question and he brings up a legitimate point. He says, I can't speak for the rest of your fans, but I can't afford $900 Canadian for Izotope RX. So when you dig into those plugins, I usually tune out. Could you sometimes spend a little more time with the Adobe Audition native effects, which I and probably a lot of your followers resort to using? So what I can promise you, Jim, is no, I can't promise you that I'm going to do that in Adobe Audition because I've just canceled my subscription. However, what I can promise you is that my focus will remain on the concepts and the basic principles so that you can apply this in any application. So everything that we just did here, you've got a leveler, you've got a compressor, all of that you've got a denoiser, all of that is available in Adobe Audition, and the principles are the same. You've also got a match loudness panel. So all of the stuff that we just did here, you can do in Adobe Audition just using the same concepts that we just covered here. So hopefully that's helpful for you. And yeah, I'll definitely continue to focus on those concepts so that everyone can benefit from them. Next up from Cameron, how do you store your microphones, and do you store them differently depending on the mic? I currently have them in a ceramic foam case with silica gels, but I've heard the foam can deteriorate and ruin the microphones. Do you only use foam cases for transportation? Do you Ziploc them and then place them in the case, or just Ziploc with gels? Well, the considerations may be a little bit different in really humid environments. In really humid environments, it may make sense to put them in Ziplocs. and to keep the silica gel in there. We live in a super dry environment, so we don't generally have that problem. In fact, we have the opposite problem where things just desiccate here naturally, including ourselves and our noses and our everything else. I haven't had any problems with foam deteriorating and ruining any microphones. I've owned microphones for the first microphone I purchased in 2000. I've had at least 15 years, probably more than that. But I don't know. For those of you that have owned them longer, let us know if you've run into any issues. But I just store them in the, usually in the cases they come in. So here, for example, here's the case for the Shure KSM7, and I just store them in that case that they came with. And that's a relatively new mic, but even my older mics, a lot of times they'll come with pouches, like the pleather pouches or whatever. Haven't had any problems with those. If you are in a really humid place, then yeah, a Ziploc may be a good choice with desiccant in there. Some people actually have the electronics dry boxes. You can do that as well if you're in a really humid environment. But that's been my experience so far. So if anyone has a different experience, definitely let us know up there in the chat. Another question from Cameron, is it okay to disconnect and or change out microphones while my audio recorder is still on? Yes, it is okay. However, what I generally would recommend, and this doesn't apply to all mics, but generally if you have a phantom powered mic, I'd turn the phantom power off, let it settle for a few seconds, and then disconnect it and reconnect the new mic. So that's probably the safest way to do it. Another thing, yeah, so that's basically it on changing out microphones. Let me go back to the previous question. There is one exception, that is storing ribbon microphones, and I don't know that you were really asking about that specifically, but ribbon microphones are very sensitive. And in that case, it can make a difference if you store them upright versus on their side, because that ribbon can start to kind of flex over time. So definitely follow the manufacturer's suggestion for your particular ribbon mic. In most of the kind of traditional designs, you want to keep them upright, vertical, just to keep that ribbon in its best condition. So, all right. Thanks for that, Cameron. Appreciate the question. Next up from Song. You mentioned it's possible to create a new mono mix to do the final adjustments like phase rotation or loudness normalization in Fairlight. Could you walk through how you would do that? I couldn't figure it out. All I found is how to create a submix, which would be different than how you did it in Audition, and I'm not sure how I would apply those adjustments, at least not in the way you've shown using RX Connect. Okay, so let me just jump over here to DaVinci Resolve. If you could bring that up for us. All right, so here I have a super basic mix. I've got intro music, dialogue, outro music. The big thing you need to do here, Song, is you need to come up to timeline and choose bounce mix to track. You get this little dialogue here. And so it's just going to take the entire mix here, and we're going to put it on a new track. Just select new track, click OK, and boom, it's made the mix on this track down here. Now what you can do is you can right click and you can take this out to your let's see, where is it? This is where I'm going to probably come back into Resolve here. There's an edit selection. You can set up an external editor. I probably have upgraded and haven't set that up yet, but there's a way to, we cover this in the course. You can actually set up an external editor, so you can round trip to Izotope here, for example. But that's how I would do this. I would export this, take it into Izotope RX, do the loudness normalization and whatever final pieces I needed to do there. And then I would save it. That would bring it back into here. And then what I could do is you could just come in here and you would just disable these tracks here, or mute them, essentially. And I think you can actually disable them. Looks like the newer versions, they've changed fairly substantially. So in any case, we could just mute these, and then this will be your final mix here. And you should be good to go. So hopefully that gets you where you need to go on that particular one. Okay, over to the second question. Do you know if there's any downside to use TRRS extension cables for TRS connections? Some of my mics have TRRS connectors, and I'm wondering if I could just get TRRS extension cables to extend both my TRRS lav mics and TRS lav mics. I would assume it would be okay, but was wondering if you had any idea about it. Well, it depends. It can be a problem depending on the microphone and what you're plugging into. Then some of the newer microphones, they're like camera top shotgun microphones, the Rode VideoMic NTG and the Deity D3 Pro, they're using TRRS, but they can adapt themselves to essentially become a TRS. In that case, it probably won't make a difference. But there are some that are sensitive to that. So it's going to depend on the microphone. So you're going to have to test each one and see which ones are sensitive or which ones are going to work that way and which are not. The pin out is different. And in some cases, they'll work okay. Some cases, they may not. So sorry, I don't have a definitive answer on that, but that is one that it just differs from device to device. All right, next up from Philip. What do you think is holding back Deity from launching the BP-TRX, which I think was originally announced to be released in August 2020, if not even before? They say they're still testing, which makes me curious of which technical issues might be the ones they are still trying to work out. Do you have any guesses on what might be the most challenging part of developing such a system? Well, I'm not sure. I don't know what the holdup is. I know that manufacturing is a big holdup right now for all of the tech product producers. So I don't know if that's part of it. Another thing I do know is that Andrew from Deity he knows Gordon from Electrosonics, and they've had conversations. Maybe there's a potential patent issue that they're trying to kind of work around. Gordon in Electrosonics has a little bit more experience with the patent issues here in the United States with Zaxcom and the patents that they own. So, for example, Electrosonics made a little portable digital recorder, like a body pack recorder, several years ago, I think 2016, 2017. And evidently Zaxcom sued them over that, so they discontinued that product and they made a new stereo version, which gets around the patents because it's stereo instead of mono. So it could be that, I know Andrew and Gordon have had conversations, so maybe over at Deity, they're trying to figure out how to work around those. I don't know, but that's a guess. There's also the manufacturing challenge. And frankly, a couple things. I would prefer that Deity get this right, especially on the hardware front, rather than rush it to market, A. And B, Deity does have a tendency to announce way early. They basically announce their concepts or their early prototypes, and then it's a lot of times they find, maybe there's some issues that they didn't consider early on. So that may be a factor as well. Next up from Philip, I own a pair of Octava MK012 mics with cardioid capsules, which I originally purchased for musical applications. Do you think it pays off to get an additional 1 or 2 hypercardioid capsules for indoor dialogue? Or is there not as big of a practical difference to justify even this comparatively small investment? Good question. Let me get a sip of water here. No, I think that can be a fine. I haven't used the supercardioid capsules on the Octava, so I'm not, I think just in terms of polar pattern, they'd probably be advantageous for dialogue. But again, if you're doing really tight framing, a lot of times you can get away with a cardioid and it's not a problem. So I wouldn't expect a huge difference. I think it's going to be a bigger difference when you have to move back a little bit. That's when you'll notice a bigger difference with the supercardioid versus the cardioid. So it's a trade-off. There's a tail on the back of a supercardioid, so there's no tail on the back of a cardioid. Cardioid's a little bit wider on the front. Supercardioid is more focused on the front. So it's really just a trade-off, and you're talking about fairly small nuances, but if you're doing a lot of wide interview shots or wide talking head shots, that's when I think the super can be especially helpful. So hopefully that helps, Philip. Excuse me. All right, next from Michael. In one of your videos about podcast mics, you talk about the importance of choosing a mic that handles sibilance well, since it's difficult to remove in post. Actually, it's not that it's difficult to remove in post in all cases. I think it's difficult in situations where the microphone has a really pronounced presence boost and the person talking into it has a lot of sibilance in their voice. That's when you can start to get distortions at individual frequencies. It wouldn't be as if the entire mic is clipping, but that particular part of the frequency range can be distorting, and that can be where it's a little bit problematic. That's where it becomes a little bit more challenging in post to remove it because it's already done some distortion. It's already distorted some. So that's what I was talking about specifically. And so Michael says, can you talk more about that from a mic design and acoustic perspective if you know, or just give some background? So that's the main idea from my perspective. And I'm somewhat sensitive to that topic because I do have a lot of sibilance in my voice. So what I have found is that in some cases, if that presence boost on, the high frequency boost between 5 and 10K on the microphone is really pronounced, you have someone with sibilance talking through it, even when you get in post and apply a de-esser, it still sounds a little strange, even when you've pulled some of that sibilance out. So that's the main thing I'm talking about there. When people are choosing a microphone for podcasting or, any purpose really, if you have someone with a lot of sibilance, I typically prefer to use a microphone that doesn't have such a presence boost. So that's kind of this whole concept of matching to the particular voice. So hopefully that helps. All right, next up from Chris. Chris had a question here, is trying to solve a particular problem. Let's take a look at this here really quickly. So Chris is using a Countryman B6 terminated with an XLR, and so he bought this adapter, and he's trying to get this into a Tentacle Sync Track E. So when he changed the B6 to the Track E, I get no sound, presumably using this adapter. When I plug the B6 into the Mix Pre without the adapter, I get sound, so the mic is good. It could be a cable issue, but I'm wondering if there's something about the signal chain that I'm missing here. Any ideas? Okay, let's show. This is a particular adapter that you're using, Chris, and this is a Sennheiser product. So I will say this: I suspect the cable is probably the issue here. The cable, Sennheiser actually wires their 3.5 millimeter TRS connections a little bit differently than other manufacturers, and I think that's probably the problem here, if I had to guess. So probably what I would suggest is getting back in touch with B&H and say, hey, this cable didn't work out. Can we do an exchange? And just tell them what you're trying to accomplish. And they may have some recommendations for you on other cables that they carry that could solve that issue for you. It's not the ideal situation. Doing adapting like that is a little tricky. And I don't know if, for example, that XLR connector, and this may be part of the problem too, it just occurred to me that if that XLR connector on the microphone is actually converting phantom power that's coming from a mixer from 48 volts down to, the 3 to 5 volts or whatever it is exactly that the B6 is optimized for, then this is probably not going to work with the Track E, because the Track E has got to provide power to that microphone so it can work. So it might be that this is not going to work at all. So you might actually want to contact support over at Countryman and just tell them what you're trying to do and see if they have a suggestion. It might be that you need to re-terminate that B6 so that's actually made for a 3.5 millimeter input. So, all right, Chris, thanks for the question. Next up from Dave. These are just a couple people submitted some things they wanted to share. Not a question for me, but I thought I'd mention the Leveler module in RX Advanced on the post-production suite. It's my new go-to tool that I use after any initial denoising or production dialogue and other audio voice recordings. It's especially nice for leveling dialogue audio when speakers aren't pros and don't have control over their volume levels, or when they're tired, etc. I like using Lavalier in lieu of other more traditional Leveler in lieu of other more traditional normalization techniques. Leveler keeps the noise floor as low as possible. It often helps to avoid having to do a lot of manual level adjustments. So if you get a chance to try it out or end up doing a demo, I'd look forward to hearing your experiences. So we did show that a little earlier here today. Dave, thanks for the suggestion. And I agree, it can be a really useful tool. And I find it to be pretty useful as well, especially when you have those kind of loud, quiet talkers. And in corporate video, we do have plenty of those. So it's a really useful tool. All right, next up from Joe. Again, this is not a question, but just kind of feedback on what his experience has been over the last week here. First, I've had a blast this week trying out the Hollyland Lark 150 wireless mic system after losing a Rode Wireless Go transmitter. For those not familiar with the Hollyland Lark 150, it's a new consumer-grade wireless lavalier microphone system. It's very similar to the Wireless Go, and we haven't done a review of it yet. They've asked, but I didn't have time at the moment when they asked, so we might do a review of that at some point in the future. Or Joe, looking forward to your review, letting us know how your experience has been with it. Second, I've had some We've had some wind here this week, and one characteristic I'm seeing is that lavs with dead kittens fare far better than the Takstar, Rode, and Deity on-camera mics with dead cats and shock mounts. I'm thinking this is because the bodies of the on-camera mics are still exposed to the wind, and the mic bodies must move some relative to the capsules, whereas the entire lav is somewhat protected. This would also explain why a full blimp enclosure eliminates the wind noise, as the entire microphone is shielded from the wind, not just the pickup tube. I am using a lav with a dead kitten when I can't handle or use a blimp, and leaving the small camera mount type mics in the truck. So yeah, I think the problem with the camera top microphones is a lot of times those the fur covers that go on them don't have a tight seal. And when that seal is not tight, wind can still get in there and create problems. So thanks for sharing your experience on that, Joe. All right. I think we're ready to go to the chat and talk a little bit. Let's talk. Anyone have any questions there that they want us to bring to the community? Emma's going to take a look here. In case anyone is interested in the Motu M4, I got one, but their drivers for Big Sur aren't ready yet, so no loopback or low latency. Boo-hoo. Okay, good to know. Thanks for sharing that detail. Actually, I was thinking of getting an M4 for a review. Heard a lot of good things about the new Motu M2 and M4s. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, we're having our own Big Sur issues at our house. I think Emma, Emma's good on her laptop, but Danny has Big Sur on her iMac, and everything seems to be working except for her trackball. She's a trackball fan as a pointing device, and it works about 70% of the time. And then the other time is like, why is it not working? So same thing. It looks like it's a driver issue. So be careful about being bleeding edge on your operating system. All right, it's Scott. Thanks so much for showing the software other than Audition. The monthly rent is too much, especially if you just want one or two apps Adobe has. Yeah, so I was paying somewhere, it was like $25 a month for Adobe Audition alone. Just to put that in context, Studio One from PreSonus is $15 a month. And, Logic is how much is Logic? Is it 200 or 300? I can't remember. It's 200 or 300. I think it's 200. Yeah. I think it's 200, and it's a one-time purchase. And so I bought Final Cut Pro 10. The way Apple does things is really nice if you're on a Mac. I bought Final Cut Pro 10 in 2014 or 15, and I still haven't had to pay for an upgrade. And it was a $300 purchase. That's value. I have no qualms about spending $300 if I'm going to be able to use an app that long. So that's a nice thing on that side. Izotope is, they have not gone to a subscription model yet as far as I'm aware. I hope they don't. It's a mixed bag thing. Here's the thing with Adobe Audition, the promise was that they would continue to upgrade it consistently and more quickly. And they are adding new features, but I haven't found that they're adding new features that I need. So, for example, one thing that you still cannot do in multi-track mode on Adobe Audition is select multiple tracks at the same time. So, for example, if I want to delete, a couple of tracks, and I'm not talking about clips, I'm talking about tracks, you cannot select multiple tracks at the same time. I've been to the Adobe Audition forum or the Adobe forums to put the feature request in. A bunch of other people have upvoted that feature request, including myself. And it's 2021 and they still don't. It's like, why? And what they are adding is a whole bunch of the essential sound panel. Now, that's great for people that use that, but I don't generally use that. So I don't know. It's just been really kind of frustrating for me. That it feels like I'm paying for upgrades that I don't need, and they're not doing the upgrades that I do need. So, I'm not trying to do a sob story here, but just for me, it hasn't been as great a fit lately. So. And that is getting a little painful to keep paying $25 a month for that. So, all right. Lloyd, good to have you here, Lloyd. In the music world, dual mono can refer to a stereo file that has two files for a stereo mix, one for left and one for right, as opposed to an interleaved stereo file. Okay, very good. So dual mono doesn't mean strictly that the file is mono. Okay, and interesting. Thank you for that. That's interesting. I'm trying to think of when... I'd like to have a conversation with you sometime about that, Lloyd. That's interesting. When you might want to use that then. Okay, cool. Are there loudness standards for YouTube? Yes. Well, yes, sort of. There are. The ideal loudness as far as YouTube is concerned is minus 14 LUFS. And again, they kind of followed other streaming services. For music, that's great. For primarily spoken word content, to me, that sounds too compressed. So here's the way YouTube handles it. If you upload a video and the audio is louder than -14, they will pull it down to -14. If you upload a video and it's quieter than -14, they won't do anything. Is based on the experimenting I've done, it looks like that's what they're doing. So I guess it's not really a standard, but that's how they choose to manage loudness over at YouTube. So that's the short version. It has been, I've been using Waves NS1 lately, and it works great at floor reduction, but when I have long pauses in talking, it seems to taper off its effectiveness until speaking happens again. Any suggestions? Well, I'm not intimately familiar with NS1. I haven't used it, so I don't know. If anyone else has used Waves NS1, let us know in the chat and what your experience has been. I haven't run into that issue with the Adobe Audition noise reduction or with the either dialogue isolate or dialogue noise reduction in RX. So it sounds like maybe the NS1 is doing it in a different way. So that may make sense to either get specific advice on NS1 from others that have used it especially for dialogue processing. It's different for music often. Just because with music, nothing really stays silent for that long, right? Where you need noise reduction. I don't know. In any case, I would get some advice from someone who's used it, especially for dialogue editing or processing, and or look at other noise reduction plugins as well. Okay, Alan, what if your mic is set up in a booth? Would you set up and break down daily?
Regarding how to store mics.
Oh, how to store mics, back in that context. Okay. Not necessarily if your booth is fairly dust-free. I think that the important thing to keep in mind about microphones is the three things that are most damaging to microphones and sound capture are water or moisture, dust or dirt getting in on the capsule, and wind. Those are kind of the three main things. If your booth is not particularly dusty, you keep it pretty clean and there's not a lot going on in there, and you're gonna be using it again tomorrow, I would have no qualms about leaving it up. I leave this up. I do leave the foam cover on, but I just leave it up because I use it so often. I use it at least 4 or 5 times a week, almost every day. And there are many weeks that go by where I use it every day. So for me, I just generally leave it up, and it's not terribly dusty in here, is it? No. So good question, Alan. I do have experience with degrading foam on mics. It's humid here in Seattle, and I have often purchased used mics locally that were stored in humid conditions where the foam has fused to the body and has generally made a mess. So I now store my foams separately from the mics. Okay, good. Thanks for that, Scott. That's good to know. And yeah, Seattle is definitely humid. In fact, I think that's probably the most humid place I've ever been. Maybe the UK. Hawaii, yeah. That's right. There was a story. Emma was on a bus in Hawaii. The air conditioner broke, stopped working, and they actually had to stop the bus because the entire inside fogged up within seconds, right? It just, yeah. So, yeah, in those humid conditions, thanks for that, Scott. That's a good point. Ted says, do you have to do much audio processing for your live YouTube sessions before putting them up? Or is it pretty much just copying the saved session? Well, do you mean like live as in live stream or as in the produced videos that go up, like pre-recorded, edited? Those, yeah, there's a little bit more processing depending on the video. Now, the PodTrack P8 video that I put up this morning on my main channel, Curtis Judd, I did no processing except to loudness normalize to -23. And the reason I did that is so that everyone could hear exactly what it sounded like directly out of the recorder with a Shure SM7B. Just so you know what you're starting with. And I think that's important when you're doing a review of an audio product like that. People need to know where you're starting. You can also do video, process the audio so they can get a sense for where they can go with it. But I think it's super important to give people a sense for where you start with it. So that's why I do that. If I'm doing one that's not a microphone review or not an audio interface review or a recorder review, then I typically will do a little bit more processing. I don't get super heavy-handed. Typically almost, when I record here at home, at least where I have control over the environment, I don't typically have to do any noise reduction. So I don't mess with that, but I do obviously loudness normalize. I sometimes do a little EQ depending on which microphone I'm using. Often a high pass and a low pass filter just to kind of cut off the stuff that we don't need at the low and the high ends. My voice and most microphones tend to create asymmetric waveforms, so I will do that adaptive phase rotation. So that's generally what I do. That's about it, though. Typically not a whole lot. And in the live here, we do have a compressor on, and we're doing just a little bit of mild compression, but other than that, we have a high pass filter on, and that's basically it for the live streams. Anything else? We're not doing anything else, I don't think. Okay. Dean says, what's the best way to convert a lavalier mic to a headset wearable mic, say for a gym instructor? Well, I've never done that. But what I would look at is I would look for places to mount the microphone. So if the instructor wears glasses, that can be a really good place to mount the lavalier microphone. In fact, it typically sounds quite good. If you go up underneath one of the arms on the glass, just off to the side here, gets it nice and close to their mouth, and it generally sounds quite good. But I haven't actually like created a boom or anything like that. Or you can get ear hangers. I think you can. I imagine you can without a microphone, and then you can just boom. Put the microphone on there yourself. But I don't have experience doing that specifically. I will, mostly I'm. For a lot of gym people, for gym instructors, I think it is really good to have the headset microphones. But I have usually just bought headset microphones as opposed to convert one. But I imagine if you could find one of those ear hangers, then that would be the best bet. Or even buy one of the really cheap ones, like JK Mike J makes some that are really inexpensive. All right, dumb question. When would you use a compressor over a leveler? Well, I think you saw in the demo a little earlier, I used both. And I was using the compressor for a specific use case and the leveler, obviously, to level things out. But in that case, I was just using the compressor to manage transients. I wasn't really looking to, like in music, a lot of times you may use a compressor intentionally a certain way, in a heavy way, to affect the sound of the instruments. You might use a compressor even in dialogue audio if you wanted to get a very intimate in-your-face kind of sound, where you can definitely achieve that as well. So for particular narrative scenes where you want to get that very either intimate or sort of in-your-face sound, that's when a compressor could be helpful as well. So there are just different ways to use it depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And when I say heavy, you'd probably go much lower on, or, pull that threshold down so you're cutting into more of the dialogue. And you would probably use a more extreme ratio as well to really kind of, clamp down on it, or as some people say, bulldoze it. And that'll get it, sounding up very close and in your face. Curious if anyone doing talking head videos uses both a boom and a lavalier at the same time as a standard practice. Seems safer to be sure, but I don't catch a lot of discussion on that. I do. When I'm doing my corporate work, I almost always use both. And you can mix them if you get them in phase. But typically what I do is I drop one of them. I just use whichever one sounds best, almost always. In narrative film, you have, I think in more cases there, you will actually tend to blend them a little bit more. I have heard of post-mixers actually blending like mid-phrase even, just because something happened during the production sound where they would actually blend from the boom to the lav and maybe back. So yeah, definitely for those cases where it would be, where the stakes are high, that is to say it would be expensive to do a reshoot, that's where I typically use a lav and a boom. And especially when I'm operating solo, where I don't, I have as much of my capacity focused on sound as I can, but I'm also doing camera, the interview, the lighting, and everything else. So those are cases where I like to give myself a little bit more risk reduction by using both mics. All right, Mark, could you live without a dynamic mic in your mic locker? Only condensers. Okay. Well, everyone can live without a dynamic microphone. Nobody will die. But I know what you're saying. Well, I'm a microphone junkie. My name is Curtis Judd. I'm a microphone-aholic, and I have a lot of microphones. So it would be hard for me, but here's the thing: it depends on what your situation is. If you're doing live streams and our podcasts, or recording spoken word dialogue that's not narrative film in an untreated space and it's a really reverberant room or something like that, I would hold on to the dynamic mic personally. That's my take on it. If you have if all the recording spaces where you record are fairly well treated or just sound pretty good, then yeah, you could probably do without it. Another thing, the Shure SM7B, I mean, I haven't heard a lot of, I don't know. If you're trying to be a minimalist, then yeah, ditch it. Time to give it to someone, to a new home where they can use it more than you do. But if it like space is not a huge issue for you, I'd hold on to it. I mean, if you do something at some point where you do need to kind of manage a room sound and you don't have an opportunity to do acoustic treatment, that's a great solution right there. Number 2, is it worth upgrading from a C200 to a C70? I don't know how to answer that. I don't see that really as an upgrade necessarily. Well, I mean, I guess it's an upgrade. It's newer technology in the C70. We've been happy. Have we been happy with the C70?
Yes, except we can't figure out the focus peaking.
The focus peaking is kind of weak on the little screen, so you have to put an external monitor on there. And for us, the dual gain output is helpful if you need a lot of dynamic range and you're finding yourself really struggling to expose for really wide dynamic range scenes. The small size is nice. I like that. I don't know. I mean, if you've got jobs where you need a smaller camera and you don't shoot RAW and you want that dual gain output and I don't use by the way, we use a native lens on there. We use an RF lens. We're not using the adapter. I've heard mixed things about the adapters. Some people love them, some people don't. So you're going to have to switch out your lens set as well. I mean, I think it could be for us, it's an investment in the future. I think that we're going to see the Canon. Well, maybe we will, maybe we won't. Maybe the lower end Canon cinema cameras are going to go RF and the higher ends are going to stay EF. I don't know. I mean, the higher end you can actually buy with PL mounts, but for convenience to have something smaller. So frankly, with the pandemic, the C200 has become our streaming camera, and we now have actually on it a matte box with a filter in it. And the C70 is over here. It's our kind of stealth camera. It's a smaller one. So I don't know if I'd replace it. I think they complement each other pretty nicely. So there are my rambling thoughts on the C70 versus C200. I am new to Izotope, confused about the differences between Nectar and Neutron. Yeah, so Nectar is basically just it's a series of plugins, all kind of in one plugin for vocal processing. Neutron is, well, and I don't use Neutron, so I am not an expert on Neutron. So my understanding of Neutron is that Neutron was more of when you have multiple tracks and you need them to sit well together, that Neutron would help you in terms of essentially dynamically EQing one so that it wasn't stomping on the other. That's my understanding of Neutron. Let me see if I can pull something up here really quickly on Neutron. There's elements. I don't want elements. Neutron 3. Let's go to our computer here. Yeah, so this is really when you're doing a more sophisticated mix. If you could bring that one up on here for us, Emma. Okay, so the main idea is to kind of getting everything balanced out. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes you will have, usually certainly in the context of music, but also in the context of film sound design and mixing, if you have, for example, music and dialogue and you want your audience to be able to hear the dialogue even when there's music behind it, you may need to do something to make it so that those two sit together nicely. And essentially what Neutron does is it's basically sidechain compression or sidechain dynamic EQ. And so it will bump the music out of the way as the dialogue is hitting, like on a millisecond by millisecond basis. So it's just making more space for your dialogue in the mix in that particular example. That's the main idea with Neutron. Nectar, as I mentioned before, is basically kind of the more traditional set of plugins that you use for dialogue processing: compressor, de-esser, EQ, that kind of thing. So that's the difference between those. All right. I'm told that it's time. So thanks, everybody, for joining us here today. Thanks for being a part of our community. If you are interested, we are, with Rob and Jim, going to be overanalyzing Making Waves tonight, that movie called Making Waves, the art of cinematic sound. So if you're able to join, we'd love to have you come over there as well. Otherwise, get out there and make some great sound. We'll talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.